Well, welcome everyone to Girl Talk Apologetics. My name is Patty Trotty, and I am one of the co-hosts for the group. For those who might be joining us for the first time, Girl Talk Apologetics is a community of women from across the country who are exploring the truth of Christianity by reading and discussing Christian apologetics books together. Tonight, we are very honored to welcome Mr. Greg Koukl as our special guest. He is joining us for a Q&A session on his book, The Story of Reality, which we've been discussing for the past 6 weeks. Greg is a Christian apologist. He's a radio talk show host, and he is also the founder of Stand to Reason, which is an organization dedicated to training Christians to defend their faith with knowledge, wisdom, and character. Greg, welcome to Girl Talk Apologetics, and thank you so much for taking time to meet with us tonight. It's very exciting for us.
Well, it is a little bit of a strange circumstance here because I see all these female faces and one male one on the screen here. Although in my home, I'm the only male. Well, we have 3 female human beings, 2 female cats, and 1 male cat. But he's not especially helpful in me dealing with all the estrogen here. But no, it's a real treat, though, to be able to talk with you. And I'm especially gratified that there are so many ladies that are pursuing apologetics. And when we first started, over 25 years ago at Stand to Reason, there were very few. And the ones that would come to our events were dragged there clearly by either their spouses or their husbands or their boyfriends. And in the last 20 years, though, things have changed dramatically. And it's really, really great to see so many women that are involved in the enterprise of thoughtful Christianity and making the case that Christianity is actually the true story of reality.
Yes, and on that same track, before we get started with the Q&A, I wanted to let you know that this particular group of women was formed as a result of your answer to a question that was asked at the end of STR's recent online book club discussion of the new edition of your book, Tactics. I don't know if you remember, but someone asked you for advice on how to get more women interested in the dry tinder idea that you talk about at the end of the book.
Right, that's right.
Well, that was me who asked the question. And the other 2 co-hosts of this group are the women who responded to your answer right after you gave it.
Oh, my goodness. And as I recall, I suggested you might have to go outside of your local community in order to find the dry tinder. And this is possible now more and more given the internet capability. And is that right?
Yes.
And this is well, that's wonderful. So there you go. That wasn't that long ago. That was a couple of 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think that happened. And look at the wonderful response that you have from around the country. Wow.
Right. So you can take some personal credit for the creation of this group.
Okay. And I'll kind of do that. I'm really gratified to hear that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, one of the other 2 women actually has a previous connection to you, and she's going to take a minute now to share that story with us. Her name is Ann Sharp Sands.
Oh, my goodness.
Ann?
Hi, Greg.
Oh, where are you? I'm looking for. Oh, my goodness. Oh, so nice to see you, Ann. I think you posted something on my Facebook sometime recently, or you made a comment somewhere. I said, wow, it was great to see a familiar name once again, yours especially.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to let all the ladies know that I met Greg in 1991, many years ago at Hope Chapel, Hermosa Beach, California, here in California. I had just become a Christian and someone had handed me a cassette of Greg's teaching. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one who thinks about this like this. And you completely, all your teaching and, you had a huge impact on me to this day. It really shaped the way I think about my faith. And
wow.
You and Melinda, who started Stand to Reason, baptized me back then.
Right.
And, I remember going down to KBRT when you had a radio show.
Sure.
Helping you pack some of those cassettes back in the day.
Right.
Anyway, so I wanted to, a personal note, about 3 years ago, right when Story of Reality came out, I had invited an unchurched friend to church with me. And it was a message on kings like David, Saul, and such. And they're going on, and she leans over, she's like, who's David? And she had no idea. And afterwards, she's like, you know what? I don't understand what's going on. I don't know who these people are that they're talking about. I don't understand the story. Is there like a Cliff Notes of the Bible? And I said, well, maybe I can help you with that. And then like the next day, this comes in the mail.
Oh,
like,
my goodness.
And you know, the foreword where Nancy Piercy talks about
You
coming
did a
in
great job.
a movie halfway through the plot, guessing at events, not knowing the characters. I'm like, oh my gosh, literally this woman just talked about this. So anyway, I just want to say I'm very happy your ministry is taken off.
Well, so nice to hear from you, Anne. I actually, it's funny because I have a little image, a cameo of you and I talking with J.P. Moreland many, many, many years ago, and you were raising all kinds of legitimate questions with him, and one of them was, well, what if, something to the effect of, well, what if this particular thing that we believe in, what if this is false? And JP says, just because it's possible for something to be false doesn't mean we have any good reason to believe it is false. And so you had kind of raised a classic skeptic's question, and he had given a remarkably apt response. So apt that it's stuck in my mind ever since then, and I've used it many times. But you were the one who asked the question, and it was in our threefold company there that this discussion came up. So anyway, there's my own little anecdote.
Welcome to our group.
All right. Well, Greg, at the end of our Q&A, I want to ask you to talk about some of the different resources that you make available through STR that some of these ladies might be interested in. But for now, could we start with just having you tell us about your personal journey into faith and Christian apologetics?
Yeah. I became a Christian in 1973. I was not raised Christian. I was raised Roman Catholic, but in our particular home, it was more of a religious activity. It wasn't a deep conviction about God and Christ. And so the result was, after everybody left, I should say grew up, and reached kind of their own age of decision about their own convictions, and everybody went different directions. And for me, this was around 1968. And if you look back at people who some maybe experienced it as well, it was a radical time in our American culture. New ideas were coming in, and a lot of new things were happening in the counterculture. The Vietnam War was going on, the anti-war protests, the British invasion and music, and Eastern religions were flowing in. And you know, I'm 18 years old, and this is not the time of a young man's life when he wants to think about virtue and purity and God, you know, kind of thing. So I just embraced that whole lifestyle and that whole way of thinking. And for a while it was pretty exciting, but it has its liabilities, and maybe I'll mention about that in a moment. My younger brother, Mark, 2 years my junior, became a Christian during this time, because this is when the Jesus movement was flourishing, especially in Southern California, where I had moved to in 1972. I had gone to school in Michigan. I grew up in Chicago. So, and so he's pounding on me all the time about Jesus. And frankly, I thought I was too smart to be a Christian. You know, I thought I'd been there, done that. You know, I think Christianity was for people who couldn't think for themselves, kind of deal. So, so I kind of brushed him off. But I actually went through some radical changes in my life during that time. I had a long-term 6-year relationship with my high school sweetheart that was shattered, broken, and when we moved to California, I came out here to win her back, basically. So I came to California chasing a skirt, to put it simply, and I didn't get the girl, but God got me. And the sum really of that happening in my life was that I realized that my own philosophies of life, all of these empty things that I had embraced, which were really cool at the time. And by the way, we are going through an incredibly almost identical resurgence of the foolishness of the 60s right now. right at this moment. There are so many things that are similar. People embracing all kinds of radical ideas that seem morally substantive but are actually shallow when you look deeply at them. And and then I realized that my own philosophies couldn't do anything for me when I was really down and out. Now, that wasn't what brought me to Christ, that bad experience, but what it did do is wake me up a little bit. And then, my brother was sharing with me more, and other people were sharing with me more. And there was a time I was in the Army at the time. I was an Army reservist, and I went to my last summer camp in Washington State, and I thinking about all these things. In fact, I was thinking more about Jesus, as it turns out, than I was thinking about my former girlfriend, who was still kind of in the picture somewhat, and I was still trying to win her back. And so I knew something was afoot at that time. And that's why I prayed a simple prayer and just asked God if he was real, to show himself to me, to help me to see that what my brother Mark was telling me was actually true. And a lot of people pray that prayer, actually, when you hear their testimonies, and it really had a remarkable effect. Not at the moment. I mean, I didn't hear any voices in the cloud, no coconuts falling from the tree, no thunder or lightning or anything. It was just a guy praying. In fact, I thought it was kind of stupid at the moment, because in the middle of my prayer, I stopped and I said, "You're stupid. You're talking to the sky." But I had kind of the hound of heaven on my tail, and he got me. And so in 1973, and a Friday evening, my brother came up from Long Beach, where he was living. I was in the West End by UCLA. And that was the evening that I put my trust in Christ and began to follow Christ. And I put the words there, I'm choosing my words carefully here, because what I said was, I put my trust in Christ and began to follow him. I didn't just make a decision. I just didn't walk down the aisle and raise my hand and say a prayer. There was a transformation in the way that I decided to think about the world and the way I decided to live as a result of it. And to me, those two go together. That's what repentance involves. It involves as one text puts it, repentance towards God, a change of mind about God, and faith in Jesus. You're turning to him to walk with him. And that changed everything for me. And that's now what, 40, I can't do my math. When you cross over the millennium, I can't do math. So I think it's about 48 years, something like that, coming up in September. And it's been a Mr. Toad's wild ride, actually, for me. And I've had a tiger by the tail, and I've been dragged by God through all kinds of crazy things that have been adventuresome, but also very painful in many cases, all through my whole life. And so, I'm sensitive to people overselling Christianity, as they often did in the Jesus movement, as this nirvana on earth where all your problems get solved if you just try Jesus, try him, see if you like him, kind of deal. I don't think that's an accurate view. And so a big part of my own Christian life, trying to be fruitful for the kingdom in the various ways that I've had opportunity to do that, is colored or influenced by a desire to be transparent and honest about the nature of reality. And life is hard and then you die is one of my favorite sayings, but death is not the end of our lives. And I've just been thinking more recently, now I just turned 70, thinking that I have lots of time left. And that's not kind of like a sunshine up your skirts. I'm old, but I'm young at heart, and I got to make the best of my years. That's not what I mean at all. I mean, I've got eternity left. I'm just starting the endless existence that I have. And so if the first few moments are a little bit hard, when I see those in perspective of eternity, it makes a difference for me how I address these things. And so this is something that I want to bring to what I do as a follower of Christ, not just so much as an apologist, but as a brother to other brothers and sisters and people considering Christianity. I hope they consider Christianity, because I'm convinced it's true in the deep sense of the word, but I don't want them to consider it for the wrong reasons.
So is that
So
basically, is that kind of what led you into specifically Christian apologetics?
yeah, well, that's a good question, and it's not what led me into apologetics. I think I became well, first of all, apologetics had nothing to do with my conversion, which is very unusual for a person who does what I do. Most of my buddies, in this business, J. Warner Wallace, Lee Strobel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, these people have all had apologetics as foundational to their own conversion experience, but this is not the case for me. For me, it was something entirely different. I was just dragged into the kingdom, kicking and screaming, kind of thing. I became convinced Christianity was true, but not for any good reason. It was what the Holy Spirit did in my heart. That's all I could say. It was after I became a Christian that I had to defend Christianity, and so, as William Lane Craig puts it, there's a difference between knowing and showing. And so I knew, because of what God was doing inside of me. But in order to show somebody else, I couldn't be looking at this. I had to be looking at other things. I had to answer their questions in a coherent way. I had to answer their challenges, and I had to demonstrate that the Christian worldview taken as a whole made a lot of sense. And not only that, but as I say in the story of reality, is the best explanation for the way things are. So it has explanatory power. And so in engaging people during the Jesus movement is what piqued my interest in apologetics. And I read Francis Schaeffer was really the biggest influence in my life at that time, though I did read C.S. Lewis and some of Josh McDowell. And then I visited Schaeffer's L'Abri for a few times, and some speak a couple times. And this just seemed to resonate with the kind of individual that I was. It was consistent with my personality, I guess, to find things wrong in other people's views and tell them how to do it right. Well, that's a terrible liability in many areas of life, but I found a way to make a living at it. So,
kind of a polemicist.
Yes, I think to some degree I am. That is a nice way of putting it. But it's interesting, because when we talk about Stand to Reason's objective of building ambassadors with knowledge, wisdom, and character, this is something that I have grown to see is vitally important in terms of a well-rounded Christian person. But it's not because I exemplify those characteristics. It's because these are the characteristics that all Christians needed to exemplify, including me. And so I've been a work in progress as an ambassador for Christ, especially in the character area. An attractive manner is the way we characterize it. And also the tactical maneuvering, which is the wisdom and artful method aspect. The knowledge part, man, I was cranking that out. That was easy for me. But learning how to put the knowledge into play in a way that was compelling and attractive, appealing, made sense to people, and engage them in a practical fashion, and doing that in a courteous way, well, that was a big challenge for me, and continues to be in some degree. So we're all in this together, is the way I like to explain to people. And I tell a lot of stories in the tactics book, especially the new one, the 10th anniversary edition, just about how I did not do so well in many cases, and even recently, I stumble, and I have to get back on my game plan and follow my own instructions. Now, the coach is not always the best player on the team, but he should at least be following his own instructions. But it's a life deal, it's a progression, and the grace of God is the safety net for me for all of these things. And early on as a Christian, I moved into a Christian community in the early 70s, 1974 in February. I moved in, lived there 2.5 years. And I got discipled there. I got trained there. It's called the Jesus Christ Light and Power House. I know it sounds kind of corny now, but it was a magnificent place to be discipled and taught. And it really helped set my trajectory forward. And so this is why, actually, because of that experience, and especially the relationships I developed there with more mature Christians, my heartbeat is actually not for evangelism. My heartbeat is for discipleship. And this is why our mission statement of Stand to Reason is we train Christians. This is how it starts. We train Christians. This is what really gets me turned on. Now, what we hope to do is train Christians who have a heart for evangelism. This is how the whole body is working together in different ways. But I get introduced sometimes as a guy with a great heart for evangelism. I'm not going to, disagree in public and embarrass anybody, but that I never said that. And it's not in any of my bio stuff. People just make these assumptions. But I do want the project of evangelism to go forward, because our Great Commission is to make disciples, and evangelism is logically prior to that. You can't be a disciple until you become a Christian. And so I want to be involved as a faithful worker, following Jesus, being a good ambassador, and using whatever capabilities that I uniquely have as a Christian to advance the kingdom, specifically, especially in the lives of other followers of Christ. And so that's one of the reasons so deeply satisfying for me to see my fellow sisters in Christ, disciples of Christ, followers of Christ, benefiting from something that I've offered.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's good to know you're a real person, just like the rest of us.
It's funny. I just posted some things on Facebook, and my Facebook, I'm not a social media person. Okay. I don't really care about that stuff, but I realized, being in the role I am, people, it would be good to have a glimpse into my life. So on my Facebook, I don't do theology. I Stand to Reason Facebook might do that. My Facebook, I just do my personal stuff. So I just got back from vacation, and I was in Wisconsin where we have some property, and I was doing remodeling, and I'm crawling under the house and knocking things together. There's a picture of me just completely covered with dirt as I'm fixing stuff, which I'm capable of. I was a carpenter before I became in full-time ministry. So I'm capable of this. And then I had a bad experience with my boat where I was going 40 miles an hour and my trolling motor popped off and into the thing, and it was destroyed the shaft. It was actually a kind of a dangerous moment, but then I figured out the problem. It's all in the Facebook. But the response somebody gave is that, wow, you have a real life. I thought all you guys did was like drink tea or smoke cigars and drink coffee and read theology and argue about apologetics, So anyway, yeah, I'm a real person. Let's just put it that way. And
we're happy to hear that. Well, I think we probably have some ladies waiting to ask you some questions.
You were talking about kind of the generation in which you found Christ.
Yeah.
Maybe the early Jesus movement. How do you view the current generation coming up? What's some strategy when it comes to talking to 20-something people about the Lord or apologetics, or trying to reason with them and help them understand who Christ is? How do you view this generation?
Well, I think it's really, really difficult right now, partly because 50 years ago during the counterculture, which, as I mentioned earlier, there's it's almost a carbon copy in certain ways of what's going on now. The young people were coming out of a different mental framework. They still largely held on to the notion that there was truth in the world, although this is something that Francis Schaeffer spoke to a lot of times as small t truth, my truth, instead of capital T true truth, as he put it. So you're already dealing with that relativistic impulse in there, and had to clarify the kinds of things that I clarify in the early stages of the book, The Story of Reality. But still there's this residual there, and there's a residual respect for authority, and a residual respect for the status quo and the wisdom of the ages and stuff like that. Now, this was all being questioned, obviously, and challenged. And some of you remember one of the slogans of the 60s was, never trust anybody what? Over over 30. Don't trust anybody over 30. That was the thing. So now you have this idea there that it is the young people who have the wisdom, the young people who haven't lived life, who have the wisdom of life. Of course, this is topsy-turvy. Okay, now you have the same thing going on now, but they don't have this background, this backdrop, this memory of the 50s invested in them. They have grown up in a culture that is excessively subjectivistic, which is why they're very comfortable saying that a man is a woman and a woman is a man. You are whatever you think you are. That's what's the reality is in your head. So this creates a tremendous difficulty in talking to this generation. Now, I cannot, I wish I had something to tell you, like, here's the way you talk with these people. All right. Here's the key. Okay. Because I understand them. I don't understand them. I'm 70 years old. I would suggest that you get, if you want to really do well with your millennials or whatever, I don't even know what they call them. I'm glad they had Generation Z, because they've just run out of letters and maybe they won't do this thing anymore. You know what I'm saying? But listen to Brett Koukl, over at Maven, or listen to John Stone Street at Breakpoint, or listen to Tim Barnett, on our team, and some of the others that really kind of have their fingers on the heartbeat there. They know how to talk the language, whatever. I just can't do that. I know this sounds really bad to say, but in a certain sense, I'm too old for that. It's like I'm kind of in my lane. Now, I will tell you something that's encouraging, because I see a range of ages represented here on the on the screen. And what's encouraging to me is Francis Schaeffer's contribution in my life. And I have actually in the book on tactics, I talk about this, both in the Taking the Roof Off chapter, and especially the new chapter in the updated version, the 10th anniversary version, and it's called Inside Out. And basically the contribution that Schaeffer's made is that everybody has to live in the world that God made. And everybody is made in the image of God. Okay. Now, it doesn't matter what they believe or what they claim about reality. This is the truth. If Christianity is true, they're in God's world, they're made in God's image. And this means that there are lots of things that God has built in on the inside that end up coming out on the outside, even with atheists, even with Richard Dawkins, for goodness sake, that are inconsistent with their stated worldview, but are consistent with Christianity. So, for example, every single human being is no matter how virulent they are with their relativism, turns out to be a common sense moral realist. In other words, they really do believe in objective morality. And that's why they say there is no morality and it's wrong for you to push yours on me. Now, you might have caught the contradiction there. If there is no morality, then it can't be wrong for me to do anything, including push my morality on them. Why do they say that? Because they're speaking from their current politically correct worldview on the one hand, but on the second hand, something on the inside is coming out. And that is that we are moral creatures made with moral motions, as Francis Schaeffer put it, and we cannot avoid it. At the end of that chapter, I say human beings can run from God, but they cannot run from themselves. Let me just say that again. Human beings can run from God, but they cannot run from themselves. So this means we have an ally. As I've said in different places, we have an ally in reality. And part of that reality that I'm speaking to right now is what's on the inside of every human being. Okay. So even if a person's a Gen X or a Gen Z or a millennial or XYWQYP, who knows, they are still human beings. And that means that there is something that we can speak to. Even with all this other stuff going on, there are things that we can speak to. The truth still resonates with true human beings. Now, they may be rebellious against it. They may have to have some brush cleared by answering some questions. But there's a certain sense why if I'm going to talk to a millennial or someone Gen Z or whoever comes after millennials, I'm not going to try to get hip. I'm not going to be chill or whatever that my daughter keeps saying that. So my 15-year-old, I'm just going to try to tell them the truth. And I'm going to try to tell them in as gracious a way as possible, but I'm going to use a lot of questions. And so that's where the tactical element comes in. And so this is where I think, say, the ambassador model, especially informed by the tactical approach, which is the wisdom element of the model, is not bound by any cultural restrictions, because humans are still humans, no matter where they live or when they live. Okay. So, I mean, I wish I had something better to tell you. And I do think there are some things to be sensitive to. There's a sense, for example, of these younger generations of strong sense of community. Okay. I actually think it's a false sense of community because they're doing it all digitally. Like the famous thing where a guy and a gal go on a date and they're sitting there and they're both on their phones. What are they doing? They're talking to each other. They're texting each other back and forth across the table, So, I mean, there are things that there's a certain sensitivity, obviously, to the certain types of injustice or what they perceive as being injustice. And that's a good thing. That's the idealism that we had in the 60s in our angst and our hostility towards the Vietnam War. And there's a willingness, unfortunately, now to take that to extreme measures so that people who are against injustice create injustice in trying to fight injustice. And that happened during the 60s as well. So there's a lot of similarities there. But I can see how it'd be difficult, when you have children or grandchildren, and my children are the age of your grandchildren. So, but still keep in mind, we all live in God's world. And we are all made in the image of God. And what that means is they know they're special and they know they're broken. They know they're special. Human beings are special, but they know they're broken. And so those are themes that we can capitalize on no matter what generation we're speaking to. By the way, the detail of what I've just explained is in the chapter Inside Out in the book. And there's a shortened version of that you find online because I did a solid ground on it a year or so ago called Inside Out. The story of reality is informed by some of the concepts that I just offered you. But when I speak in detail about it in Tactics, and here is the new Tactics book, and it's got the 10-year anniversary thing. If it doesn't have the red thing, you're outdated. It's still a good one if you got the old one, but it doesn't have that chapter in it. And that's why I recommended you can get the free shortened version of the chapter online as a solid ground archive piece called Inside Out.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Rhonda.
Who else has a question for Greg?
Okay, Susan Morales. Hi, Susan.
Hi. Thank you again for accepting our invitation, Greg.
You're so welcome.
The third lady who also asked the question on the Stand to Reason live stream. And The Story of Reality is a book I plan on rereading often. It was very helpful for me. And in it, you explain that Adam and Eve rebelled against God's kingdom. So I wanted to see if you can help me understand this a little better. How does this tie in specifically with Jesus preaching, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. And there are a lot of people, there are a lot of different opinions about what the main theme of Scripture is about: reconciliation, relationship with God, love, forgiveness, things like that. I suggest in the book that the main theme of the book is in the very first verse, and that is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what you have is you have a king who creates a domain. He's the sovereign and he creates his domain, and his domain is everything that belongs to him, which is everything because he made it all. So now we have a kingdom. And there is and then one of the elements of creation is a personal being, human beings, that he creates specifically, it appears, to be in relationship with him, okay, or in friendship with him is the way I put it in scripture, because we see in the early stages sharing friendship there, and we see that in the end that the redeemed are called the bride of Christ, so there's an intimate relationship that's entailed there. So, and it's, I think, pardon me, this is one of the reasons why we are made in the image of God. We are made like him so we could share uniquely in a relationship with him. Okay, we each share each other's the human nature and God's image, and so this allows us to have a different kind of relationship than, say, my daughters can have with their cats. So I don't know if anybody actually has a relationship with a cat, so maybe that's not a very good illustration. But we have interactions that are warm and friendly and meaningful with all kinds of things in creation, other creatures, but not the same as with human beings. And so I think it is this quality that connects us with God in a very particular way. All right, and it's what God intended, this connection. But what ends up happening is there is a rebellion where human beings defy the nature of the relationship. Okay, the relationship is creator and creature, potter and clay, father and child, because I mentioned in the book that it isn't just sovereign and subject, which is distant and cold, but it's close, it's familial, right? Okay, and that gets violated. How did it get violated? It got violated the same way that human beings have violated God ever since, and we see it now in spades. Unbelievable, because what's going on nowadays, and you think of any particular topic, especially the sexual ones, but in just about anything, this is about who the conflict that we see in the world now is about who is in charge, the creature or the creator, the potter or the clay. And the clay continually says from the beginning, that's the initial error, all the way till now, and they are screaming it, the clay is in charge, the clay is in charge. I'm in charge. I'm in charge. It's all about me. However I see it, that's what's true. However I want it, that's the way it's going to go. Have it your way. You look at the advertisements, you see the appeal here. Okay. I did it my way, Frank Sinatra sang. And of course, that was very appealing. And there's the rebel instinct in so many people. It's part of our fallen nature. And so what this creates now is a rift in the kingdom, that people are no longer properly in relationship with their sovereign. They are in rebellion to their sovereign. So the kingdom is in revolt. There's a brokenness in the kingdom because there's a brokenness in the relationship. And so what the subsequent voices of God did was to call people back to that, in a certain sense, that system. It's kind of a cool way of putting it, but call people back to that thing. Remember I said in the story of reality, when God made everything, he made everything just right. It was all the way it was supposed to be. Everything was working together in harmony, which is just another way of saying that everything that God made was good. Okay? So, I mean, saying it's good doesn't mean, it's all dippity-doo, la-di-da. No, it means that everything's just right. It's just functioning the way he wanted it. It's moving along smoothly, the relationships, everything like that, until the rebellion. Okay, then we have evil coming into the world because there's this brokenness now that human beings caused. And so what Jesus and the prophets are calling, and the disciples, those Jesus trained to follow after him, what they're doing is they're calling people back to the original system. You're living in a brokenness. You're living out the brokenness. And all of your solutions to the brokenness are more broken solutions. and their foolishness. In fact, we can see their foolishness. If you're acquainted with the coherence of the story, you can readily see the foolishness of the alternatives. And so there's a beckoning back underneath the kingdom of, underneath the authority of God, and into his family. And see, this is a kind of a unique element, much in the New Testament, because now it is a familial, a much deeper and a more tightly familial relationship than ever was before, because of the role of the Holy Spirit now abides within us. So we are now his family. As many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. Not everybody's not the child of God. That's a unique kind of relationship. We're all the creation of God. We're all valuable in God's eyes, but we're not children of God. So coming into that relationship with God through Christ, we are now in his family. And now he deals with us as a loving father deals with a child. And that's discipline and grace. Actually, discipline is an example of grace. Hebrews 12, a good father disciplines those he loves. Okay, so but now we're in a safe place, the place of the safety of grace, so that what errors we commit are now chastised and used as elements of training by a loving father. So the appeal of Jesus is, in a certain sense, to bring us back to the unity and the whole of a world under God's dominion, but now this element of family and this intimacy and this closeness that really is a function of the new covenant, not so much the old, as a function of the new covenant for everybody, given the Holy Spirit. This deepens and enriches the entire element. But the initial call, though, of kingdom is back under authority. Now, this does not resonate well with American sensibilities, and some people don't like that when I talk that way, but I do think that's the element. And by the way, if you look, just for fun, read quickly through the book of Acts, looking to isolate every single time the gospel is proclaimed. All right, just do that. And you'll find 13 occasions, and you will never find a single reference to the love of God. Not one. I know it's kind of stunning, I'm not trying to ruin your day, but that's the book. You won't, actually the word love doesn't even occur in the whole book. Look in your concordance or whatever. Now, the love of God is manifest there, obviously, but the nature of the appeal isn't the love of God. God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. That's not the appeal of the apostles. The appeal is to come back under the authority of God, come back to his kingdom, because if you don't, trouble awaits.
Greg, I think Nancy had her hand up.
My question, well, first I want to thank you so much. I have been a believer for 74 years.
Oh my goodness.
I was only 8 years old when I came, and I was in the bathtub, and I remember asking Jesus.
So you became a Christian and got baptized at the same moment.
Yes, right. Yes. And so I believed in, as you said, there's a difference in faith and in trust.
Yes.
And as a child, I did come with that, and it was in trust. So I don't want to get off on a tangent, but that's my history. After reading your book, all the things that it said in the beginning, and it had those 5 words with God, man, and Jesus, the cross, and resurrection. I thought, because I'm an old school teacher, so I thought, oh, that's fantastic. And I looked at the book, I read everything I could read, and I read it to my husband. We sat down, and I didn't know it. Do you know Mark Adler? Was he one of your students?
Mark
Adler. He's a Jewish believer.
No, the name's not familiar to me. He may be one of my students, but that doesn't mean
Well, anyway,
I can't remember the names of my children, and there's only 2 of them. So
well, anyway, this is not to puff you up because you're unpuffable. That's not how you operate. But I found in trying to get rid of things, we're downsizing in our age. I found an email from him in 2011. And he said, we were in a Messianic Jewish congregation. My husband's Jewish, I'm not. But anyway, he was giving us information to be able to go out. And as you said, evangelism comes before discipleship. But part of our outreach was to do that, evangelism and then disciple. So anyway, in this, he writes, the first thing, and I just found it, if I'd only read your books, 2011, he says, and probably the world, he didn't just, and he's very learned. Anyway, he said, is Greg Koukl. And I thought, why didn't I, and he has a list of other ways we can reach out and grow. Anyway, back to, so now thank you for Patty and Susan and Ann who have gotten this together. So my question is on page 170, and they're your words. And do you have your book in front of you?
I'm paging there now.
The second?
Actually, they're all my words, just point of information, but
I wish you wrote down.
I'm just joking. Okay, I got page 170 in Perfect Mercy.
Go down to the beginning of the third paragraph. No, your close ones in the Lord are not lost like others. You will with them. The story tells us, so comfort us now while we wait. So my question is, you wrote the book in 2017, and you said, and there's so much more, but that would take more books and more vision than is in me. This will have to do for now. So my question to you is, from 2017, we all grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus, our Lord and Savior, to now be him the glory now and forever. So what I'd like to know about the faith, you have grown, obviously. So I want to know, this will have to do for now. But so now we're in 2020. From then till now, how have you grown to give us more so we can keep growing day after day?
Got it. Well, I haven't learned anything since then.
Of course you have.
Well, I have. You're right. But I don't know that I have much more to say about this. Keep in mind this comment where I say there's so much more, but that would take more books and more vision than is in me. In this particular, I'm speaking of the perfect mercy, basically, in the final resurrection. What is ahead for us? And I'm just finishing the book of Revelation, and in fact, I'm using I think I mentioned this on the air, a little tool on the internet called the Bible Project, and they give like 8-minute summaries of each book. In Revelation, they have to do 2 segments. And boy, when I looked at their take on Revelation, it was quite a different one than I had been weaned on. So, and maybe many of you as well. So when it comes to this issue, there's still very little that I know now that I didn't know then, However, I think that what's happening for me in the last few years is I'm not sure how to put it. I mean, the word maturation comes to mind, but I'm not sure if that's quite it. You know how I mentioned a few moments ago that there's that my life has just begun kind of thing. I got lots of time. Well, that's a fairly recent reflection, and it's been a good one, an important one for me, because there are more grains in the bottom half of the hourglass than the top, many more, and those grains are falling a lot faster than they ever did before. And so at this stage in life, many people have to look at what's left and seeing how they're going to spend that, what they're going to do, and what this all means. And this is an opportunity for a lot of people to be quite discouraged, because they look back and see that where they're at now looks nothing like what they expected. Maybe there's doubts or recriminations or unfulfilled desires or whatever. And so I have those just like everyone else. I cannot relate to people who say, yeah, I look back at my life, I have no regrets. Man, I got lots of regrets. There's all kinds of things I regret. I wish I would have done differently. However, this brings me back to 2 things. One of them is the grace of God, knowing that I'm safe regardless, and I have the safety to make mistakes and not do everything perfectly. It doesn't justify the mistakes. It just means that I'm under God's grace. I'm in a safe place. I think Luther said something to the effect of trust God and sin on boldly. And he wasn't encouraging people to sin. He was trying to encourage the sense of safety to make mistakes. And you're not always worried that God's going to lower the boom on you. That's the grace of God. But also that I don't have to get everything done in this lifetime. I don't have to fulfill all my desires. Francis Schaeffer said that all utopian dreams end up being cruel. When we make a utopian type, perfectionist type expectations on other people or on ourselves, it turns into an act of cruelty. And the reason he said is because it can never be fulfilled. C.S. Lewis said that if we're really honest with ourselves, we'd have to acknowledge that we're never quite satisfied in this life. This life is not where our satisfaction is going to come. And even in the best of times, we're dissatisfied. And so it's easy to look at that dissatisfaction as a failure on our part, when what Lewis points out is that's because that pushes us to look forward. It's this yearning and hunger for the perfection of the world to come, and maybe a little echo of the way it used to be. I make a reference to that in the story of reality. It's almost like we have a remembrance in our heart of the way it ought to be, the way it was, and the way it should be, but it's not now. And this is something we look forward to. And it's what Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 through 18, the famous weight of glory passage that Lewis wrote his wonderful essay on. And what Paul says there is momentary light affliction, which is an odd thing for him to say, because his affliction didn't seem momentary and it didn't seem light, when you think of the whippings and beatings and shipwrecks and everything that he talks about in that same book. But he says momentary light affliction because he's comparing it to something else. Momentary light affliction, watch the verb here, is producing for us. It is the affliction that is doing the work for the end that he mentions. Momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory. And there's Lewis's title. Far beyond all comparison. As we look at not at the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are perishing, the things that are unseen are eternal. Excuse me. And that is the thing that I feel I've been, Nancy, I've been focusing in on more in the last few years. I don't have any deeper insight on the nature of the afterlife. I just have a deeper understanding of certain aspects that were clear to me even before. That godliness, as Paul puts it in 1 Timothy, physical exercise profits a little, all right, but godliness, by comparison, is a means of great gain, for it holds a promise not only for this life, but also for the life to come. So as J.P. Moreland has said, this life is a preparation so that we are fit to spend eternity with God. That's the way he put it. Pretty good. So we are fit to spend eternity with God. And so I think of that more and more now. And when I run into trials and struggles and difficulties and in relationships, hey, raising kids is hard. Being married is hard. And what I see from these circumstances is what God is wanting to do is he wants to move me further and make me more fit to spend eternity with him. And so it helps me to be more sanguine about the challenges that I face right now, both emotional and physical. I have a lot of physical challenges at the moment. So so that I guess that's what I understand better, Nancy. I don't. It's more of an application of those basic things than having a more insight into those basic things.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're kind of getting close to the end of our time that we had planned. Greg, I
Oh
don't
my
know.
goodness, really?
I know.
Holy cow, that went fast.
I don't know if you're available to stay on any extra time, but
I can stay on, sure. No, I can stay on. Yeah, I'll be glad to.
Well, some of these ladies.
Look at all these wonderful women I have here in front of me to talk with. I'm so glad to do so. No, it's all right.
Thank you. Well, some of them might need to go because they have children they need to tend for. So I just want to ask if any of you ladies who might need to be signing off before we finish have a question for Greg.
I do, if I can.
Taylor.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, my name's Taylor, and I actually first heard you on an interview with Melissa Doherty. I think I'm pronouncing her last name. I'm someone
Is that one of the two gals that were the New Age gals and became Christians?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Her and Doreen Virtue.
Uh-huh.
So it's great to hear you and all
you.
your input on here. I'm someone that's, I guess, amidst my conversion out of New Age and into this, and I found this group on Instagram through Susan, actually. But my question is, what resources would you suggest for someone who's transitioning out of that kind of worldview to recognize the deceptions? Because I'm, like you mentioned, the brokenness earlier. And I'm thinking about the worldview within the New Age is very much that you are okay as you are.
Yes, right.
Right. And you want to emphasize the positive, and you don't want to feed into the negative, because then that manifests it. Yeah. And so there's a resistance towards even acknowledging brokenness.
Right.
And so I guess my question would be, what resources would you suggest for recognizing that kind of deception on this end, on the New Age end? Because that's Satan, right? I mean, that's
sure. And I'm not sure if you mean resources, what kind of literature or books or whatever could I refer you to?
I'm a big reader.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't go deep in that field, and that's why the chapter on mindism, or the segment on mindism, isn't very detailed. In fact, I passed it on to Doug Groothuis, a philosopher who's written on the New Age, just to make sure I got everything right, and he made some corrections for me, which were helpful. But so that's, again, not my wheelhouse so much. And when I hear a question like that, I end up kind of reverting back to something that I said earlier, and that is that keep reminding yourself that your friend who is advocating this is a human being who lives in God's world and is made in the image of God, and therefore knows she or he is wonderful, but is also broken. So the brokenness is something they're running from. They don't want to mention it, but it's real in them. And maybe one of the things I mentioned in the chapter in Inside Out is sometimes appealing directly to the existential need as opposed to the rational concerns is a powerful way to go. I talk about it in that chapter about lecturing at Berkeley a number of years ago, and that talking about guilt. And I said, everybody here experiences guilt. You do it, and they were all talking. I mean, I had an audience response kind of thing. And I said, why do we feel guilty? I said, well, maybe we feel guilty because we are guilty. Well, is that in the running? And then I said this. I said, the answer to guilt is not denial. That's relativism, which I had been lecturing on. The answer to guilt is not denial. The answer to guilt is forgiveness. Now, I don't know about you, but when you heard that, whenever I've heard it dozens and dozens of times coming out of my own mouth, but even when I just said it just then, something inside of me resonated, because there's a deep human desire for forgiveness of the guilt we know we have. And so the existential end run would be more like going directly to the fact of saying, say, if you were the person, I would be saying, Taylor, I understand. I've been there. I understand the whole idea, the negativity, creating your own reality and blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, something's wrong. And running from it and denying it is not going to change that. I'll tell you what's going to change it. Forgiveness. And only Jesus can give that. Okay, now I was not doing apologetics there. Mm-hmm. But, just role-playing it, I think many of you could see the appeal that has, because it speaks to, it's not manipulation, it's speaking to something that's true inside the person. So what I'm going to suggest is maybe sometimes that personal, direct, end run to Jesus. Let me tell you one other anecdote that I had. It was a conversation I had with a New Ager, and I do not enjoy talking to New Age people. Okay, as you could probably imagine, the kind of person I am. I'm square, man, and they're like liquid, totally all over. Take any form. They're gas. They take whatever form the room shaped it, kind of thing. So I'm in Seattle. It's about a year ago. And there is it's a Sunday morning. I just did a Friday night, all day Saturday conference. And there were other players there, other speakers, but I was worn out. And I'm not a good morning person. Some of you might know that. And so I have to speak at a church that morning. And so I'm about checking out the hotel. I'm sitting there having breakfast in the hotel restaurant. My bag is right next to me. And this young lady comes up, and I'm like, I'm an atheist before my first cup of coffee, right? So this gal comes up to me, way too cheerful. She's the waitress, and she's carrying on and on and on and on and on about all these things. And so, I just want her to go away, pour my coffee and go away. So, and I do not want to talk to her about Jesus. I'm just letting you know, okay? And so she says, well, what are you doing in town, kind of thing. And so this will get rid of her. I'm going to preach at a church in about an hour. Okay, that'll get rid of her. Oh, that's great. That's great. So I said, what, are you a Christian? And she said, no, I'm not a Christian. I used to be, but I'm not a Christian. The universe takes care of me. Okay, now I know what's going on. But to say the universe takes care of you, what the heck does that mean? So I asked her, well, what does that mean? And she said, well, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, is the universe a person? No. No, God is a person. Oh, okay. Oh, so God takes care of you, not the universe. Yeah, well, God is the universe. Well, how can God be the universe? But so what she's doing is she's just kind of saying these new agey things. And I can't help myself. They are so obscure and unusual. I've got to ask for clarification. Now, some of you know this is just the tactical game plan that I'm doing reflexively. Because as I told you, I do not want to talk about Jesus with this girl. I don't want to share Christ. I have to preach a sermon, and I haven't had my coffee yet, and I'm still half asleep. So we carried on a little bit longer of this, and finally she went away, which was fine with me. And then she came back. Now listen to this. Then she came back. No, I didn't make any statements. All I did was ask some questions, and she did her best. And she didn't seem like the least bit affected by anything that I said. You know how it's like the water off the duck's back. You know how this is. You're talking to your friends, Taylor. She came back and she said, you know what? Nobody has ever asked me questions about my views like you just did. And it got me thinking. I said, well, if I had more time, I'd ask you more questions and you could think some more. Said that in a friendly fashion, but it was true. So here's the point. Notice in that case, I was using my tactical game plan reflexively and against my will because I didn't want to get into anything. But still, even with somebody who's new age, by asking for clarification about these statements that, and you know this, Taylor, the statements that sound spiritual but don't make a lot of sense. And Deepak Chopra is like this. I could listen to him for I can't listen to him for a half hour, but as long as I listen to him, I still can't figure out, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, can't figure out what he's saying, what he means. But a lot of people, because of that, they're going, oh, so profound, he must be right. I had a debate with Deepak Chopra for 1 hour on a national TV. And anyway, so maybe this is helpful, just using the questions to draw people out. So there's 2 tips then. The first one is just make the existential workaround and just go for the heart, so to speak. The inside out tactic. And the second one is ask a lot of questions about the sensibility of the claims that they're making. Because look at it on their view, since they create their own reality, if you punch them in the face, that would be their fault. Right. Because they made that reality. So anyway, so that's kind of taking the roof off a little bit, showing them the consequences of their view. But I'm not really good with New Agers, but maybe those are some things that would be helpful to you.
Well, thank you. That was
You're
helpful.
welcome. You're welcome. Thank
I
you.
just want to mention that was the show that I produced and had you on to debate Deepak Chopra, if you remember.
Oh, I didn't know you were involved with it. Were you working for Lee at that time?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Thank you, Anne, for reminding me.
You're welcome. And you deftly handled him. Deftly, very.
Thank you. Well, that show is on the internet now. You can get it on YouTube somewhere. So, and he was not a happy camper at the end of that, but I was. Anyway, and I was not abusive at all to him. I was just trying to hold his feet to the fire, which rarely happens. So thank you, Anne, for that. I'd forgotten about that detail.
Greg, what I'd like to do now is I'm going to try a screen share of your website, str.org. And if you would be kind enough to kind of just go through and describe some of the resources that the ladies find on here.
All right. I don't go to my website very often, but okay, this is our website. Let's see what we have. On our website, we have hundreds and hundreds of articles and hundreds of videos. And of course, one of the ways that we reach our people through podcasts. And so you have those three categories right there at the top. And if you want to search or look at the kinds of topically, you can do that. If you're interested in our speakers and what we do, then how to book us and the different people we have in play and our calendar, that's about there too. If you want more detail about standard reason, of course, about is the place to go for that, and tell you our mission, our values, etc. Okay, what we've done here, and this is a brand new rollout of our website, is we've tried to be a lot more user friendly with a lot more larger graphics and the most current things up front. So there's always, when people come to the website, they see things that they haven't seen in the last couple of days if they were just there last week or whatever. And we have standard things like the podcast, and so we keep rotating the content to be most current, but we have archive material as well. Lots of videos that we do, and here is Tim Barnett, you see, with a brand new product that we've just started to do, and it's his brainchild, and it's called Red Pen Logic. We've gotten a little bit of a pushback on it so far because it's on the edgy side, but I think it's really good. And what he does is he takes a tweet or something like that some critic has posted, and then he, as the teacher, which he used to be a high school teacher, he then takes the red pen to it in a kind of friendly but incisive fashion, and then not only is the graphic part of what you see, that is, you'll see the tweet from the other person, then his markings. There's also a video that accompanies it, and so he'll explain why he did what he did, and I think it's an excellent tool to accomplish two different things. One is to answer the challenge that was offered by the atheist or by the secularist of some sort, or even by a person who claims to be a Christian who does not hold classical Christian views. Those things come out, and Christians read them, and they don't know how to deal with them, and it gives them a shake. They think, wow, that's a good argument. What am I going to do about my view when I'm opposed like that? So what we end up doing is answering that challenge for the believer. One recent one, a woman said, Jesus said many things about helping the poor and old people and Jews and Gentiles, and she had this long list, but never said a single thing about the unborn. That's the way she ended. Now, of course, the implication is if he didn't say anything about the unborn, then he's not concerned about treatment of the unborn, therefore abortion should be okay. That was the subtext. Well, this is what we addressed in our treatment, because there's a serious flaw that's employed by that reasoning. And so a Christian can see not only how to answer that challenge, but can see how we work through the problem by using critical thinking skills, and therefore they can absorb those critical thinking skills themselves. So it becomes like a tutorial of sorts. And frankly, that's what we want to do with a lot of things, that we don't want to just tell people what to believe. We want to, or what to think. We want to help them to see how the thinking gets done. And I think the Red Plan Logic is a fabulous way of doing that. Here you see our recent Solid Ground just came out a couple of days ago. This one I call Street Tactics Part 3, and where I model in a role play kind of fashion ways of doing conversations about different things. And this one is how to deal with the abortion issue. And there you see the other parts because these came out in subsequent series every other month. So for pretty much from the beginning of the year, we've had a January, February, March, April, May, June, July. So we've had some, I think what you see here is the 4 solid grounds, starting with Harvester or Gardener, which I think is January, and then the other ones following Street Tactics 1, 2, and 3. I'm actually behind right now. I'm supposed to have turned something in, and I'm not sure what I'm going to write. So I'm behind the 8 ball on vacation. So anyway, those are the current things that are being written, and they're available. Just so you know, by the way, these things like Street Tactics Part 1, Harvester, Gardener, all this other stuff, these things are printed in our Solid Ground, which we send out through snail mail if people want that, but generally virtually. There's almost nothing in any book that I've written, certainly not the tactics book, and most of the Story of Reality that hasn't appeared in one of these Solid Grounds. So if you're not receiving Solid Ground, you need to sign up for it. I mean, simple as that. Let's scroll down to the bottom of the page. I think there might be a place. Let's see, Strong Ambassador, subscribe. See where it says subscribe there off to the left. Then you can we'll send you Solid Ground, and the alternating months will send you a mentoring letter, which also appears in a lot of these details appeared in the book. So this is a way that we can stay in touch with you and continue to mentor you, because my heart is the heart of a mentor. And I want to continue the relationship of being a mentor to those in our Stand to Reason community. And that's the way we look at it. This is a community of people that are kindred spirit, and our team has an opportunity to make a contribution to your life and to mentor you, even though I don't know you personally, and probably will never meet you this side of the kingdom, but still, so many have said that's the way they view me, as a personal mentor, and I'm glad to be in that role as I'm able. And so if you don't receive our stuff, if you don't subscribe, I encourage you to do it. It doesn't cost anything. It takes a few minutes. And then we'll be able to stay in touch with you on a more regular basis with the kinds of things that will help you to be a better ambassador for Christ.
I want to mention too, in case they didn't notice at the bottom, it shows that you also are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
That's correct. These are all Stand to Reason presences. They're not me personally. Now, of course, lots of stuff about me or from me or things I do are pasted there or put there. But the Twitter and YouTube are the Stand to Reason ones. And I have my own Twitter and my own YouTube. I don't use them as much, and it's more for what I do with YouTube. I told you, give you a glimpse into my private life. And what I do on Twitter is I try to, I don't advance a lot of things that I've read. I just try to post a thought that would be useful and helpful and that people might post on to somebody else. So that's kind of the way I use that, but I'm not a power user at all. And I can't even remember most of the time what Instagram even is. So, but our team is really, really good about that. And we have a full-time person just devoted to that. We're very well integrated in all of the current important social media, and we're using it more and more to be effective as stewards of what we have, Stand to Reason.
Another thing I want to promote too, because I've used it many times, is the app. The STR app that you can have on your phone. It's a really good way to access information when you're in a pinch, listen to the podcast and that type of thing. Take it with you wherever you go.
I agree. It's a very quick reference. I do have the app on my iPhone, but I almost never use it because, been there, done that kind of thing, I use it mostly just to show other people that you could have that. I'll ask for just a little prayer request here related to kind of what we're talking about. My publisher and my agent wants me to write a couple more books before I get too old. So, but I'm not sure what to do, to be quite honest with you. And so, maybe you guys can just ask the Lord to give me wisdom and insight about something that would be durable. I don't want to, I don't know if this ego or not, but I don't want to write something that's going to be off the shelf in a year. I want evergreen stuff. And for a couple of reasons, because if I don't have a 501c3, it stands to reason. I mean, I don't have a 401k, it stands to reason. So this helps me long term. But the biggest reason is I want to make a durable impact for Christ. And if my books endure, then that impact endures. And so I want to think about what contribution will I make that will be unique and durable over the years and won't go out of style. I think Story of Reality is in that category, and so is the book Tactics. But not sure where to go from this point. So just a little request for my sisters in Christ.
Yeah, definitely. And that actually answers a question I had, which was, are you planning to write any more books?
Well, my publisher is planning for me to write more books, but I think it would be appropriate. But just so you, this may sound surprising to you, but writing is not easy for me. I don't enjoy writing, and I don't enjoy doing radio. It's work, and I always enjoy having done it. When it's over, doing things like this is the fun part for an author, or at least for me as an author. But writing it is a lot of it's hard. It's it's not 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. It's 100% perspiration. So I mean, some of you may be writers, you know what I'm talking about. Just a lot of work. But that's okay. I'm willing to do it if I have something to say. I don't want to just make a lot of noise.
Oh, we appreciate that. Well, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Anne, go ahead.
Okay, I'm thinking this might be a matterism, as you put it, mindism overlap, although I think ultimately it's a matter thing, but I've thought about and had people ask me about computer simulation theory, whether we could just ultimately, like the Matrix comes out.
Yes, right.
In a computer simulation. I've thought about it, but I'm curious your take.
Well, ironically, Anne, this takes me back to the comment that J.P. Moreland made to you and I many, many years ago. And that is, just because a thing is possible doesn't mean it's reasonable to think that it's so. I don't even know if what you just, and I don't maybe have the faculties in education to be able to assess that well enough, but I don't know if what you described is even possible technologically. Maybe it is. Technology has its limits, although, we thought the limits were one thing, and we're discovering, they're much further out than we thought. In any event, though, I mean, for someone to create a virtual world that our consciousnesses are somehow embedded in, and we believe to be the real world, and we're just being deceived. It just struck me, by the way, that's in terms of the mind-body problem, that's a dualistic notion. So you have to have a mind in order for your mind to be somewhere that your body's not, or believing something that it's not. So that's kind of an interesting and that raises problems for physicalists, it seems to me. In this attempt is to show, here's a way that we can explain reality that I don't know, that, like you said, a matterism explanation that leaves God out of the picture, and we're just manipulated by others. But the big thing is, I have no reason to believe that that's the case. Okay, even if it could be the case, I have no reason to believe it is, just because there was a movie called The Matrix, or just because people can put things on their head, and do virtual reality games and all that kind of stuff. You still got to put a thing on your head,
Well, my thought was, there's still got to be a programmer or you know, there's still got to be somebody, and is there some way we can know that somebody? So on the one hand, you've got the mindism, if we were all an illusion, how would you know it?
Yeah.
And then, but on the other hand, you've got the matterism, where it's still got to go back to something physical in the real world, whether or not, I would think, right? Because a computer simulation is a physical bits and bytes. And anyway, I don't know. I was just curious.
No, I think what you're getting at is who was the I'm trying to remember the Matrix, the black guy who was behind the Matrix or whatever. I can't remember the act. Yeah, I don't remember the actor's name, but anyway, so there is that guy. There is somebody that's behind the scene that knows the way it really is. Okay, so there are some people that are not in the Matrix. They made the Matrix, right? On that, according to that movie. So, so even if some people are being deceived, and by the way, there is a certain sense in which what that movie describes is relevant to our worldview. Because people are in a world where they're believing lots of falsehoods and their minds are being manipulated in many ways. And this is a Ephesians 6 kind of thing, you know, and I've talked about this before. When you see something that is completely upside down, where people are saying black is white and white is black, you know, boom. By the way, no racial references intended in that particular case. I'm just saying the contrast, it's upside down. And they can't see that it's upside down, and it's obviously upside down. Then you know some other forces at work here. And this is kind of a matrix kind of thing, but the dynamics of it, of course, are not mechanistic. They're not materialistic, they're spiritual. So there is a certain sense in which we might trade on that analogy there to make our case that there's a similarity, that there is a similarity with the real world in this, but not the way you guys think. The epistemic thing, though, is like I said, if you have no reason to believe that it's the case, then there's no reason to believe that it's the case. You know, it's just a movie kind of thing. My wife made an observation last night, though, that I never thought about this before. And we went to a Beatles concert last night, an outdoor Beatles concert. It was a lot of fun. And I will say, you know, the first Beatles song I heard was I Want to Hold Your Hand, and it was 1963. And I mean, I remember this so vividly. I was 13 years old. And so I actually got choked up with a couple of the songs. But when John Lennon character sang Imagine, it bugged me because of the song and the contents, and also because it's such a beautiful song. But it's so ridiculous. It's a ridiculous song when you think of the details of it. No one has any possessions, but everybody's living wonderfully. Well, then who's taking care of stuff? Who's getting the food on the table, you know, for example, as a practical matter. However, and what my wife Steve said is what John Lennon is singing about is heaven. Because the brotherhood of man and all the other thing. Now, of course, some lines like no religion and no God and whatever, those, forget about that. But the basic world that he's describing is the world of heaven, where there is no conflict and there are no possessions. We are being taken care of. There is the brotherhood of man, you know, the world is as one. And the Christian can say, I hope someday you'll join us. You know, like he did in the song. Anyway, so just a thought. Maybe a good parting thought.
Do you have time for just one more?
Yeah, is Sarah Rainey?
Yes.
Yeah, Sarah, you look familiar to me. Have we ever met?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Just one of those friendly faces.
My question was, a lot of times engaging with skeptics, they'll say, you know, God sent Jesus to save us from himself. How do you answer that line?
Yeah, well, I say something like that in the book, you know, and this is actually a little bit of a controversial statement. I've gotten some pushback on it, but it's very solid theology. You know, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10, don't fear him who can kill the body and not the soul. but fear him who can throw both body and soul in hell. And so it is the king who is offended and the king's whose justice needs to be satisfied. By the way, in the progressive Christian movement right now, this is very, very offensive to talk about this, because this is, divine child abuse. But that's because they have a low Christology. Jesus wasn't just the Son of God. As the Son of God, he was God himself. And so God takes upon himself the punishment that he decrees is necessary to satisfy the debt. He pays the debt. And I have an illustration for that in the story of reality with the king who wraps his arms around his wife, his mother, who's the guilty thief, and takes the whipping himself. So he is both the judge and the substitute. Okay. So if a person is skeptical about that, I guess I'd want to question more, what is it that troubles you about the idea that Jesus came to protect us from himself, so to speak, or God himself? What is troublesome? Well, that sounds corny. Well, it may, but maybe I can give you an illustration. And so what I'm going to want to do is give an illustration that might resonate with them. I think the illustration in the book about the king and his aged mother who stole money from the crown is a good one, but that can be adapted to something current. Okay, so here, Sarah, you have your lovely daughter there, and I'm sure she's a sweet little girl, but I know she's naughty sometimes too, right? She's an angel, but she's a fallen angel, okay? And it may be that she is, no, she's not. Okay, there you go. See how easy it was for her to say no, okay? So it's easy to imagine someone we love like that getting themselves in a situation where we have to suffer in order to rescue them. Okay, and this is the case with Jesus and God. Now, of course, the danger is in our cases with the Father himself, because he's holy, and so there's this where a little bit of a different circumstance. Though I've heard illustrations like the judge who passes judgment in modern times on someone in the dock, and it turns out that someone is his son, teenage son, but then he takes his robes off and he goes and he's willing to take the punishment on behalf of his son. Diana Gabaldon wrote this series of books about Outlander, and my wife really likes the videos, and we just happened to, out of nowhere, decided, because it was her birthday yesterday, watched one of the videos. And in the video, in Outlander, back in 17th century Scotland or 18th century Scotland, there was a young gal who is acting inappropriately, and so they're going to publicly punish her with corporal punishment. And a young man who has no involvement with her, Jamie in the story, takes the punishment for himself, and the judge lets him do that, because he doesn't want the girl to be shamed in front of all of her friends and all of the community, because it would take her a long time to get over it. And he said, I'll heal in a couple of days. That was what he said. So it's interesting, though, that the concept of a substitute even might find itself into a Gabaldon book, like this one. And I don't even know if I'm saying her name properly, but so I don't think it's such a foreign thing. In fact, when people countenance something like that, one person gives up his life to rescue another, that's considered an heroic event. Now, the unique thing in our situation is Jesus is God. So the one offended is the one who takes the offense on himself, which is atypical of our illustrations, but in a certain sense, it adds another dimension of sublimity to it. It is even more heroic if the person who is going to declare the judgment, and an extreme one, is willing to take the judgment on himself. That adds to the sublimity, it seems to me, not detracts from it. So, but sometimes, that these are like, you do your best explaining it, and then let the Lord take over from there. And there have been lots of times when I've been out of my depth in situations, even in the illustration I gave of the Seattle waitress. And I'm bumbling along, doing what I can, saying what I can, and then God uses it in ways that I wouldn't have expected. Let me give you one more illustration, if you have time for this, of this very same thing. I became a Christian on September 28th, 1973. It was a Friday night. The next day, I had an event scheduled with my doubles partner, tennis doubles partner, and his wife and his two friends. Married. They were both married. He was in medical school at UCLA, and we went to the beach and then came back to his house for a barbecue. And my brother Mark was with me. But anyway, the one gal of the other couple picked up a piece of paper that was a tract somebody had given her. It was a Christian tract, and she started making fun of it. Well, I said to them, well, I believe that. Now, remember, I'm not even 24 hours old in Christ, and I didn't know anything except for just like rudimentary basics. But I was going to stand up and just say something. And for 3 hours, I got abuse. And I never saw those people after that, except for 4 years later. I got a phone call from my doubles partner's wife named Sandy. And she said she'd been having dreams about me and she wanted to see me. And so I contacted her. I got together with her. It turns out she was divorced now from her husband, and the other couple was also divorced. And she told me that night that she's a quiet one. And so while all this is going on, she's not engaged in it. She's cleaning up, doing dishes and stuff like that. She said, I listened to every word that you said. I was listening. The others weren't, but I was. And that was Easter week, Passion Week. And so I got together a couple more times, and she became a Christian on Easter Sunday. So there's like, Lee calls this ricochet evangelism, I guess, but, and he's got a testimony like that in his own life, but you never know what God's going to use and how he's going to use. You never know. And so speaking something out, even if it seems like a small thing, and even if it feels like it's awkward, if it's true and it's genuine and it's given in a good spirit, that's something that God can use, even with a hardened skeptic type. I was like that. J. Warner Wallace was like that. Jonathan Noyes was like that. A whole bunch of Lee Strobel was like that. And look what God did.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm sure we all gained a lot more insight into the book that we've just about finished reading. And thank you, too, for graciously extending your time with us so we could get some extra questions in.
It was genuinely my pleasure. It really was. Thank you.
Good. And thank all the ladies. I want to thank all the ladies for coming into a special meeting so we could talk with Greg tonight, too. And we'll be joining for our last discussion of your book next Tuesday night. And we'll be watching for a new book that may or may not appear in the future.
Well, thank you for your prayer encouragement on that.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. God bless you.
Bye-bye.